Welcome to John Gets Games. This is part 2 of my top 20 board games of all time as of January 2016. In this video, I'll be going through numbers 10 through 1, so let's jump right into it. Number 10 is Arboretum, which is a beautiful little card game that thematically is kind of boring. You're planting trees and trying to make nice little paths in a park for people to walk down, but mechanically it's fascinating. It has this elegant, simple turn structure where all you do is draw 2 cards and then play a card down into your tableau and then discard a card. That's it. Draw 2, play a card, discard. But the decisions that come from that are just wonderful. First of all, when you're drawing cards, you either draw blind from the top of the deck, or you can draw from some open discard piles, and every single player has their own discard pile. So you know a little bit what you're getting from that discard pile, and then when you're playing a card down into your tableau, the spatial arrangement really matters. All cards have to go orthogonal to each other, and you are trying to bookend a path with specific types of trees. Once you've figured out where you want to put that down, now you have to get rid of one of your cards. And the thing is, you start the turn with 7 cards, and you end the turn with 7 cards, but in that moment, you have 8 cards, and you have to get rid of one of them, and you're not going to want to get rid of any of them. This is one of those card games where there's kind of no such thing as a bad hand. You always want pretty much all of your cards, and you know that if you discard this card, it goes into your discard pile, and then other opponents can grab it out of your discard pile and put it into their area. So you need to look out and see what card will help my opponents the least, but also I don't really need it, and oh man, this could really make your brain steam a bit, but in a wonderful, crunchy, delicious way. And the game rarely goes over an hour, so analysis paralysis can creep up a little bit, but it usually doesn't stick around too much. So I really heartily recommend this game to anybody who likes creative card games, and honestly, the artwork is gorgeous. I know they're just trees, but they're all beautiful. I love seeing this game down on the table. Number 9 is Cant Stop, and this is definitely the oldest game on this entire list. In fact, I'll show you my copy of the game. It comes from 1980, and you can see it's all sun-bleached, barely being held together by a bunch of Scotch tape. And I've actually owned this exact box since I was a child. I played this game, this actual copy of the game, when I was like 7 or 8 years old, and I loved it back then, and I still love it now, even though I have to be very ginger with the box because it's kind of falling apart. At its core, this is a very streamlined push-your-luck game where all you do on your turn is roll 4 dice, and then you have to make 2 pairs of those dice and sum the pip values up. And they're just d6s, go 1 to 6 on them. And what you're doing, and I might as well show you the board while I have it in my lap here, is you're going to be racing up these tracks with your pieces. And as you can see, there are short tracks for the 2 and the 12, and a very long track for 7, because obviously you will get 7 much more often when you're adding 2 dice together than you will 2 or 12. And the first person to get to the top of 3 of these columns before anybody else does wins. And so that's the crux of the game, because you roll those 4 dice and then you move up columns, and then you can roll again and then move up some columns, and then roll again and move up some columns. And if you ever roll dice such that you can't move up any specific columns, then you bust and you lose all progress you got on this entire turn. But you can't stop. That's the name of the game. You just, oh, you're so close. I know, I just do it, just one more, and then you roll, just one more. It's an amazing encapsulation of push your luck. I've really loved this game, and I also just love having this really old version that I have nostalgic affection for. Number 8 is Codenames, and it's essentially my kind of party game. I like regular party games okay, but this has a party vibe where you can have pretty much unlimited people playing the game. New people show up, they can join in, they can leave at any point, but what you're trying to do is creatively come up with clues to get your team to guess specific words. There's a 5x5 grid of various words in the middle of the table. 2 people are spy masters, and the whole room is split up into 2 different teams of hopefully equal size, and each spy master knows which of those 25 cards is affiliated with them and which is affiliated with their opponent and which are not affiliated with either. And then there's the dreaded assassin. One of those 25 cards, if it's ever guessed, immediately loses the game for that team, and the other team wins, by default. So what the spy masters are doing are giving very simple clues where they say one word and a number, and the word pertains to what they're trying to match up, and the number is how many cards they think it applies to on the board, and then their team tries to figure out what those cards were. It is a wonderful experience. There's definitely lots of laughing and arguing and kind of a raucous time that can happen with this game. Sometimes it can be pretty quiet while people are just crunching and thinking, but it toes the party game, not party game line pretty well, and it also takes like 15 minutes to play, so it's easy to play at the beginning of a game night or the end or wherever. It's a very versatile game, and I really enjoy playing it, so there it is on my list. Number 7 is Isle of Skye, which also came out last year. There's a few new games on this list because I was very impressed by the games that came out last year. But anyway, Isle of Skye is a wonderful simultaneous action tile laying Euro-y kind of game. It has a Carcassonne feel where you're just putting these square tiles down and you have to match the terrain, but it has a great twist where every single person, every single turn, gets 3 tiles and they have to assign pricing to those tiles, how much they think that tile is worth to themselves or other players, and then everybody gets to buy a single tile from other people around the board based off of the price that those people set for those tiles. So you have this wonderful thinking process to do, but everybody's doing it the same. The name of this game is simultaneous crunching. When you're trying to figure out how to do your turn, oh, should I do this, should I do that? Or you're looking all around, you're not really worrying about downtime because everybody's doing the same thing at the same time. And then once you've gotten all those tiles, you put them into your little area and then you draw more tiles and you do it again. The other wonderful thing about this game is it has a great variety of scoring conditions that come out with it, where you pull 4 out of a stack of 16 every single game, so you're going to have a huge difference between one game and the game to the next with what scores points. One game you're going to score sheep, and the next game you're going to score for sets of these specific buildings and maybe for the number of completed lake areas you have. It varies distinctly and it adds a lot of variety to the game. It feels like a longer game than it is. You get like an hour and a half to 2 hour satisfying experience from the game while you only play an hour-long game in total. Number 6 is Pandemic Legacy, which has skyrocketed up to the top of the Board Game Geek charts, and it's already skyrocketed up to the number 6 slot in my list as well. I've only played it 4 times so far, and if you don't know anything about this game, which would surprise me, but it's pandemic, which is just curing diseases on the world, but every time you play the game, you do permanent things to the board. You put stickers down, you rip cards up, and so the next time you play, things are fundamentally different, and your board gets more and more unique to your specific playgroup. And I've really enjoyed it. The original Pandemic was okay. I enjoyed that enough, but it would never have made my top 20 list at all. It was just okay. But adding that legacy aspect just makes this whole game just explode with awesome tension, where you are really concerned about putting more stickers on the board, because you might be like, oh, well, we could just, that area of the board, who cares about that? That could just blow up with that disease. We'll cure it eventually. You don't want to do that because that will have ramifications on a game 3 or 4 games from now because you put those stickers on the board, and that's so much tension there. Also, you have this wonderful cliffhanger aspect where you're like, I want to know what happens next, because as a narrative, you play the game and it starts in January and goes through December in this essential thematic year that you're playing through. And as you're playing the game, more stuff gets unlocked and you could see how things happen. I'm only 4 games in, so I feel like I'm watching things ramp up. I'm sure there's a lot more stuff that's going to happen. And I think it's also likely that a year from now, if I was to do another one of these lists, this game might be quite a bit higher on the list. But right now, as of only 4 games, it's already at the number 6 slot, and I think it deserves to be there. And now for number 5, which is Settlers of Catan. I'm also going to throw the Cities and Knights expansion into this discussion as well, because that's the way I've played the game probably the most. Now, Settlers of Catan got me into board games. I know I'm far from the only person who had this happen. In early 2008, I met some new friends and they taught me this game, and I fell head over heels. I had no idea this kind of thing could exist, and we played it like every week for months. It was probably like 6 or 7 months in where we had played this game a ton of times and we were starting to feel it was getting a little bit stale. That's how I found Board Game Geek. I just looked online, Settlers of Catan, just to see if there was more to it, and that's how I found the Cities and Knights expansion. And I found that on Board Game Geek, and I was like, oh, what's this website? And I've been here for a while too. And I love the Cities and Knights expansion. It adds about an hour of gameplay onto the base game. It adds tons of complexity. Now, I know a lot of people dislike the expansion because they feel like it doesn't add enough for the added gameplay, but I've played the game more times with that expansion than without, and I just love it. It adds it adds a lot more development cards. The development cards are boring in the regular Settlers of Catan. In this game, there are 3 different types. They do all sorts of things. Many of them are kind of take-thatty. They can definitely screw with your opponents. But you also have this development track where you can upgrade on 3 different sets to give you special bonus abilities. Man, this game is just great, especially when you play it over and over again with the same people. I can pretty much never get this game played anymore. I keep trying to make opportunities to play this with people, but a lot of people are burned out on Settlers of Catan because it's an old game. It's been around for over 20 years, and I understand that, but I still think it deserves to be this high up on my list because it got me into the hobby. I still really love it. I still got it on my shelf. I've got to try and get it to the table more. It's just a really good game. Number 4 is The Prodigal Club, which is a very new game. And I've played this game less than any other game on the list, which should tell you a lot about the game itself that it is this high after I've only played it 2 times. I played a 4-player game with 2 modules at Board Game Geek Con, and I played a 3-player game with all 3 modules about a week or 2 ago. And this game absolutely blew my socks off. I enjoyed it a lot at Board Game Geek Con, but once I played it with all 3 modules, the game just totally clicked, and I am blown away. I almost put this game higher on the list. I was like, no, 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 I've only played this game twice. I need to check myself a little bit and try not to be too Cult of the New, even though this is already at the number 4 slot. So this is a worker placement game where you are trying to do the worst in 3 different tracks, and the highest of those 3 is going to be your score, and you don't want points in this game. You're trying to lose all your money and your property, you are trying to lose votes in an election, and you're trying to make everybody in high society despise you as much as possible. And you're doing all these things at the same time, and you're doing it by building these really creative card engines. As I said, it's a worker placement game. You're putting little workers out on the board. You've usually got like 4 or so workers, and it's the similar style where you put a dude down and you take the stuff, and then the next person puts a dude down and they take the stuff. It's a well known mechanic, but what the game does is it brings this wonderful engine aspect to it where you have all these different icons, and these icons can sync up with various cards to do all sorts of things, including, you know, losing that reputation and losing lots of your money, and you need to stay focused on keeping all 3 going down at a relatively even pace. It's got all these little mini games where for the society track you have 4 little tokens and you're trying to scoot them all down these 3 rows, and where they are on those different tracks will help boost certain abilities, and you're also trying to avoid other tracks because you have this like wonderful aunt who wants to tell people how wonderful you are. And oh man, thematically this game is just fun. Like all the cards are just funny. Like I can't believe, you know, oh, here's my drunken cab driver. He's gonna lose me votes because he probably ran into a light pole and knocked it down in the middle of the street. So thematically it's fun, but mechanically it is just absolutely brilliant. And especially once you add in that money module, because the money module where you're trying to lose your possessions gives you tons of these icons. It really makes the engine start whirring at a great speed. I have been so impressed by this game. I don't own a copy, my next door neighbor does, so I don't know when I will get one, but I cannot wait to play this game a bunch more. Number 3 is Crokinole, and I now realize I need to redact a statement I said earlier. Cant Stop is not the oldest game on this list. It's certainly the oldest game that I've owned, but Crokinole is a very old game. It was designed at some point in the mid-1800s, and this is a beautiful dexterity game. I own a $250 custom Helsinki-built board that hangs on my wall. It looks like wall art, and what you are doing in this game is you're either one-on-one or in 2 different teams, just flicking discs in this circular board where you are trying to get your discs into the middle area to get lots of points, and you're trying to knock your opponent's pieces out. You can teach this game so fast. It's a very simple experience, but the main rule that makes this game so much fun is that you have to hit your other opponent's pieces if your opponents have pieces on the board. So it's not just about going for the middle all the time. You sometimes have to do really terrible shots because your opponents have pieces all over the board. And this game has so many just stand up, laughing, you know, exclaiming moments where you just do the worst shot in the world, or you do an amazing shot, you flick it, and it hits 4 of your opponent's pieces out, and your piece goes right in the middle, and you're like, how did that even happen? Just wonderful, amazing moments. It's such a great icebreaker board game. You could start game nights with it. It works kind of as a filler. I mean, it usually takes probably on average about 20 minutes to play. It can sometimes go a little bit long because the scoring can have multiple rounds go where almost no points are had, but this game is so much fun, and I just love how it doubles as an interesting piece of art that I can keep on my wall, and I feel just proud to have it. It's just a great thing to look at, and it's also a conversation piece. You know, someone say, oh, about your board game collection, I'm like, well, that's a board game too. Like, what? And I'm like, well, let me get it down, teach it to you, you're gonna love it. This is such a cool game. I think pretty much anybody who likes board games should have a board. Number 2 is Hassan Satanica, which came out in 2009, and it was probably one of the first 10 board games I ever owned, because as it came out, I was just then really ramping into a variety of Euro games and seeing what was out there in the world. And I was at first pretty unimpressed with the game. I went to the game night, and some guy bought it, I think from Essen, and he put it down. I was like, this looks boring. And he's like, no, this is amazing. You gotta play it. Okay, I'll give it a shot. The board is brown mush, and the newer version of the board looks a little bit better. Mine is the original first version, which is very not interesting to look at. It's got a boring guy on the front cover, just like so many Euro games. But what's inside is this super cutthroat, high-paced, tense experience where you are putting cubes all over the board and you're doing all sorts of different actions. There's several different actions you can do in the game, and as you're playing the game you can upgrade those actions. But when you upgrade those actions, you are sacrificing putting points down on the board, because ultimately you need to put cubes down into these offices in all these cities all over the board to just get victory points. it kind of feels like it has an area majority aspect to it, which I don't normally like in games, but it doesn't matter how many things you have in an area. You're not competing to have the most in an area. You're just competing to have a large interconnected set, and you can oftentimes go where your opponents are. There's a little bit of area majority because the person with the most little cubes in a specific city gets more points, but that's a relatively minor thing on the broad scale of this game. There are so many layers to this game as you're putting these cubes out, because there's abilities to grab a bunch of cubes and just scatter them all over the board. So you're constantly trying to place your stuff down in such a way so that your opponents don't know what you want to do, because if they figure out what you want to do, it's so easy to block you. And in fact, the game incentivizes blocking. If you see what your opponent wants to do and you go there and they want to do that, they can kick you out, but it puts more of your stuff on the board, so you are incentivized to get in everybody's way, which means you're constantly trying to not be obvious about what you want to do, and then in one fell swoop do a bunch of stuff and surprise everybody around the board. So if somebody's walking by and they look at this game, they think it looks super boring. It's just a bunch of colored cubes on a bland brown board. But the people who are playing that game are so engaged, because it's this constant match of just trying to outwit everybody, trying to get to different spots before other people, trying to get those upgrades to their abilities. It is a really brilliant game. It does not see the table very much these days, I think in large part because I've played it a whole bunch and I have a bunch of new games that I enjoy playing, but it does not kick it out from the number 2 spot. I recently got the Britannia expansion map, which I have not played yet, and I'm very excited to get to the table and see what kind of new life that breathes into this game. I don't think it needs new life, because even the base game that came out back in 2009 is still a total blast to play. This is a brilliant board game. All right, we have arrived at my number 1 board game of all time as of January 2016, and it has been my number 1 board game for quite a while, so this is not a surprise, and that is Through the Ages. Specifically, I'm talking about the new Story of Civilization, because last year they came out with a revised version of the game, because the original Through the Ages came out back in 2006, and I own now, I guess, that copy and the new version, and I loved that old version. That was also my number 1 game of all time, but I had several very large asterisks to that, because I really disliked the way military worked near the late game. There just was some ways that the game really didn't work, and I'm going way overboard. Let's talk about what this game is. It's a expansive civilization game that usually plays about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes a player. So it is a very long playtime. If you have 3 players, the last time I played it took 4 hours to get that done, and we all knew how to play the game already. So you have to really like this game to invest that much time, and fortunately, it is amazing. You are essentially building lots of different engines and trying to efficiently do the most you can with your empire. You have military, and you have the ability to make science and the ability to make culture, which is victory points, and you need to balance all of those. If you just go crazy on culture and science, your military will be weak and people will attack you. And the new version still has that. You need to worry about military to a certain degree, but in that old game, you could just be destroyed, like nuked back to the Stone Age 3 hours into the game, and oftentimes it was because you just never had the opportunity to get those specific military cards. So the new version of the game makes the military a little bit nicer. It's still definitely a thing you need to pay attention to, and you can still do a lot of damage with the military, but it feels a little bit less consequential, and it really focuses on the wonderful engine building things that you do in this game as you hire leaders and you get mines and you build all sorts of civic buildings, which lets you boost all of your different tracks up. It's a civ game with no map. It's strictly all card based, and it's amazing. The original version was my number 1 game. The new Story of Civilization, the one that came out last year, it still is my number 1 game. And now I get to erase all of those annoying asterisks that made me kind of dislike that other game. They rebalanced a bunch of cards using hundreds of thousands of games of data to really figure out what cards were slightly overpowered and what cards weren't. I think that Through the Ages, this new version, is just the best board game I've ever played. It's probably one of the best board games that's ever been designed, specifically because they were able to go through and rebalance all those cards with an astonishing data set. I mean, very few games have the ability to look at that amount of data from very experienced players and really see what needs to get pulled up and what needs to get pulled down. This is a game for the ages. It is astonishing. I will be keeping this one forever. I hope to play it a couple times a year forever. It is amazing, amazing, and I have a hard time seeing another game dethrone it from the number 1 slot. Who knows what the future will hold, but this game I think will always be in my top 10. That's for sure. Probably top 5. And there you have it. Those are my top 20 favorite board games of all time as of this moment, which happens to be January 2016. I'm quite curious to see what this list will look like in a year or so. In fact, I might do another one of these videos at that time to see how much different things have changed. This list itself has a whole bunch of games that came out back in 2015, much more than I was expecting, and I think that just goes to show that 2015 was a very strong year for board games. There was a lot of very excellent games that came out. They deserve to be on the list, I think, and I will tell you, it was very hard to decide if a game should be in this slot or this slot, just kind of going up and down. I knew that Through the Ages was #1, and there was a bunch of internal debates about a bunch of the other ones, so I would love to hear your thoughts on my list and your thoughts on maybe some of these games, and maybe throw one out there that you think that I should have put on this list. I'd love to hear that kind of stuff too. It's great to realize that you've missed a diamond in the rough somewhere. If you'd like to see more vlogs like this one, as well as in-depth board game reviews and full game playthroughs, please subscribe to my channel. Also, you can directly support the channel at patreon.com/JonGetsGames. Thanks for watching.